this resolution here today, which I have to thank my colleague from the PAW for bringing forward here, is really about Canada's 150th birthday. It's about how do we celebrate our birthday in the most appropriate and also magnanimous and celebratory fashion. And to me, the way that we do that is by having a very true and honest picture of our country to date. Our country has an Indigenous name. The name Canada comes from the Huron and Haudenosaunee languages, right? And it means, a town or a city. It means a village. So how is it that our country has an Indigenous name, and yet we don't always properly recognize that Indigenous nations were founding nations of Canada? So I definitely agree with my colleague from Radisson that equality of opportunity is one of the great principles of our country. However, this resolution really deals with how do we talk about our past and how do we properly tell the story of how this country came to be. And the reality of the situation is that, legally speaking, our country is built on the merging of three distinct legal traditions. You have the common law, the civil law, and the Indigenous law. We very clearly understand how the British and French legal traditions influenced our country, but we don't also always talk about how the Royal Proclamation of 1763, Canada's Magna Carta, the pre-Confederation treaties, the Treaty of Niagara of 1764, the post-Confederation treaties, how all of those also create the legal framework with which this great country has been created. We also know that the history of this country is one where Indigenous peoples, Indigenous nations, made many important contributions. Prior to Confederation, we were the military allies who prevented the United States of America from taking over what was in Upper Canada. Yep. We were there during the Confederation process, immediately following Confederation with the negotiations which led to the numbered treaties. First Nations, Métis, Inuit people served in great numbers in both world wars, very highly decorated. One of the most decorated snipers of World War I was Francis Pegum-Magabo. One of the most celebrated veterans of World War II from this part of the world was Tommy Prince. Following the World Wars, First Nations and Indigenous veterans came home and they fought for our basic civil rights, the freedom of movement, freedom to be able to work. That helped to usher in the civil rights and civil liberties movement here in Canada. We were here for the repatriation of the Canadian Constitution in 1982. That is evidenced by Section 35 and the Section 35 recognition of Aboriginal and treaty rights. And we are still here today through all forums of society, be they business, arts, sports, technology, politics. And so we have many great heroes to celebrate. We could talk about Fred Sasakamoose, NHL player who learned to play in a residential school and became the first First Nations person with status to play in the NHL. We could talk about Phil Fontaine, another residential school survivor who rose to the heights of political achievement in this country. We could talk about some of our homegrown heroes like Beatrice Culleton-Mosinier, who, in an amazing work of fiction, In Search of April Raintree, cast a light onto the story of many of the vulnerable people in our society right here in this great province of Manitoba. And so we have this proud legacy and these amazing contributions which have been made, and they ought rightly be celebrated when we, in Canada's sesquicentennial year, look to celebrate all the great things that this country has achieved. Yes, we should do so, and we should do so in a way which is appropriate and properly recognizes the contributions of Indigenous nations. And so that means that we ought to update and amend that founding story that we tell about our country, that there are two founding nations, and say there are in fact three founding groups. Right? And I take the member from Brandon East's point. Are we gonna move from two founding nations to now 66 founding nations with 64 Indigenous nations plus the French and the English? But the short answer is, yeah, that would be great. But for today, we'll do three founding nations for the purposes of simplicity.
Baby step.
With respect to the question about languages, right now in Nunavut, Hansard there is published in three languages: French, English, and Inuktitut. So perhaps this is, the start of Canada's next 150 years, where in the future we could see also Hansard publications in Anishinaabe here in Manitoba, or perhaps could be in Heetsuk, or the other languages in British Columbia for their legislature. These are the types of conversations that we can have in our country's 150th birthday year. These are the conversations that reconciliation makes possible, that we can really engage in and make all of the people in this country proud of who we are, where we've been, but also where we're heading together. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about the process which led to our colleague to bring this resolution forward here today. Really, this is part of a movement of which former National Chief Phil Fontaine, who's done such great service to this country, this is part of his legacy building work that he's doing around the country to create more goodness for the next generation to pick up. So we all recognize that Phil played a phenomenal role in bringing the story of residential schools to the forefront of national public attention. He was the one who negotiated the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. He is the one who negotiated with Stephen Harper so that the former Prime Minister would deliver an apology to the residential school survivors. He's done such great work, and now this is his latest project. And so he sent a letter addressed to all the members of the Legislative Assembly, a letter tabled by my colleague from the PA, in which he argues succinctly why it is time for us to do this. That this is about recognizing Canada's true history in an accurate way, but also using this 150th birthday celebration that we're having this year to look forward and to ask how can we build an even better country than the one we have today, using elements of Indigenous and newcomer and other cultures to forge something uniquely Canadian and uniquely awesome. This was brought forward to the Assembly of First Nation, the collective of more than 630 chiefs across the country. They passed a resolution saying that this is one of the things that they want to see the federal government do for Canada's 150th birthday. And now there's efforts on the Hill to lobby members of Parliament to support an act of recognition on the Hill. And I can update the House today and tell you that there are already supporters from every party on the Hill who are willing to move on this. You have Conservative members and New Democratic members. You have Liberal members who are willing to support this. You even have the lone Green Party member on Parliament Hill willing to support this message. So to me, it really is a nonpartisan issue. It's an all-party issue, in fact, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker. And so for us, here in the Manitoba Legislature, I think this is a great opportunity for us to send a powerful message that not only are we excited about Canada's 150th birthday, but also that we're very attenuated to the modern world, and we're willing to work together and to send a powerful message about who we are as a collective nation and where we're headed together on this journey for Canada's next 150 years. And so, to me, when I think about this, I really do think it's a wonderful opportunity. And how appropriate would it be if the first legislature or parliament that passed something official that would be right here in the center of our country? How beautiful of a gesture would that be? How wonderful would it be if it was a house located in a place called Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, that was the first parliament or legislature to pass an official bit of business to support this? Because the name Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada just reinforces and reiterates how Indigenous nations have played such a crucial founding role in this country. Winnipeg is a Cree word or an Ojibwe word which means dirty water. Manitowabe is an Anishinaabe word, which means the Spirit is here. And when I look around the room and I recognize the collegiality and power in this room, I say, yes, the Spirit is here. And there are, good, hardworking people from all across the province who come to do this work together. And finally, our country, Canada, as I stated earlier, is a Huron-Haudenosaunee word that talks about a village or a meeting place for all peoples to come together. So how is it that we can be a Winnipegger or a Manitoban or a Canadian and yet not want to acknowledge the role that Indigenous cultures have played in shaping who we are? So I do respect everyone in this room, and I do respect the walks of life that they come from, but I do think that we ought to acknowledge a simple truth by passing this resolution today, that whether or not you have Indigenous blood, by the fact that you live here now, some part of your identity does have an Indigenous component. So with that, I will say, miigwech ka bizindaw, thank you guys very much for listening.